Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine this. You are born into a stone castle. Silk touches your skin before wool ever does. Servants bow when you enter a room. Gold glimmers in candlelight, and your name is spoken with reverence. You are a princess. But now imagine this. You are 6 years old, and men you do not know are already discussing who will own your body. At 12, your childhood is declared finished by strangers. At 14, you are carried to a marriage bed you did not choose. At 16, you may already be dead. This is not a tragedy. This is not an exception. This is the normal life of a medieval princess. And tonight, as we drift slowly through the quiet halls of history, you will discover why wishing to be a medieval princess is one of the most dangerous fantasies ever created. Because behind the fairy tale dresses, behind the jeweled crowns, behind the romantic paintings and modern stories, the life of a princess was not a dream. It was a cage. A beautiful, silent, deadly cage. In the medieval world, a princess was never born as a person. She was born as a political object. From the very first moment she took her first breath, her life no longer belonged to her. Her body, her future, her marriage, even her womb were considered property of the crown. The midwife who delivered her did not ask, "Is she healthy?" The court asked, "Is she legitimate?" Because legitimacy was everything. If the child was born from a recognized royal marriage, bells rang, prayers were spoken, and records were made. But if there was even a shadow of doubt, the girl's life could already be compromised. A princess's bloodline was her value. Not her mind. Not her kindness. Not her happiness. Blood. From infancy, she was watched constantly. Not protected, watched. Her nurses reported everything. Her tutors observed her behavior. Her servants whispered to others. She learned very early that privacy did not exist. Even her sleep was not her own. In royal households, children often slept in shared chambers. Doors were rarely closed. The idea that a young girl might have her own private room would have seemed absurd. From a modern perspective, this feels invasive. From a medieval perspective, it was necessary. A princess had to be monitored, controlled, and shaped, because one mistake, one rumor, one accusation could destroy alliances, start wars, or erase dynasties. And so her childhood passed quietly, not in play, but in preparation. By the age of 5 or 6, a medieval princess already knew what her life would be. Not specifically, but generally. She knew she would be married. She knew she would leave home. She knew she would never choose. Marriage was not about love. It was not even about companionship. It was about land, treaties, armies, and power. When kings negotiated, daughters were currency. A treaty might say, "In exchange for peace, the princess will be married." A war might end with, "The princess shall be sent to the victor's court." Her age did not matter. Canon law technically allowed girls to marry at 12. But engagements happened much earlier. Some princesses were betrothed before they could speak full sentences. At 7, she might be promised. At 10, prepared. At 12, delivered. Often to men twice or 3 times her age. No one asked if she was afraid. Fear was expected. Education, when given, was carefully limited. Yes, princesses learned to read. Yes, they learned prayer, embroidery, etiquette, and music. But knowledge was dangerous. A woman who knew too much could think too much. A woman who thought too much could resist. So education focused on obedience. She learned how to sit. How to walk. How to speak softly. How to lower her eyes. She learned that silence was a virtue. She learned that her body belonged to God, then to her father, then to her husband, and never to herself. This lesson was reinforced daily by the Church. Medieval Christianity idealized female suffering. Pain purified. Obedience sanctified. Endurance pleased God. A princess was told that her hardships were holy. And so when pain came, and it always came, she was expected to accept it quietly. Puberty was not a private experience. It was a public event. When a princess began menstruating, it was noted. Whispered about. Reported. Because menstruation meant readiness. Readiness for marriage. Readiness for pregnancy. Readiness for risk. Medieval childbirth was extremely dangerous. Even for peasant women, but for princesses, the pressure was far greater. A princess was not expected to survive childbirth. She was expected to produce an heir. If she died doing so, she had fulfilled her purpose. This was not cruelty. This was logic, medieval logic. Royal women died young with terrifying frequency. Infections. Hemorrhages. Stillbirths. Miscarriages. Medical knowledge was limited. Hygiene was poor. Doctors believed illness came from imbalances of humors or divine punishment. Pain relief did not exist. Childbirth was agony. And a princess was expected to endure it repeatedly. But before childbirth came the marriage bed. And this is where the fairy tale truly dies. A medieval royal marriage was a public act. The ceremony was witnessed. The bedding was witnessed. In some courts, nobles literally escorted the couple to bed. Curtains were drawn, prayers were spoken, and witnesses waited nearby to ensure consummation occurred. Because a marriage that was not consummated could be annulled. And a princess who failed to conceive could be blamed. Her body was examined by others. Her fertility debated by men. Her value questioned openly. There was no romance here. Only pressure. Life in a foreign court was often isolating. Most princesses were sent far from home. To lands where they did not speak the language. Where customs were unfamiliar. Where allies were uncertain. She was expected to represent her homeland perfectly while adapting instantly. If she failed, she was criticized. If she succeeded, she was still lonely. Letters home could take months, if they were allowed at all. Some princesses never saw their families again. Homesickness was considered weakness. Even queens were not safe. A princess who became queen gained status, but not security. If she failed to produce a male heir, she could be set aside. If political winds changed, she could be imprisoned. If rumors spread, she could be accused of adultery, witchcraft, or treason. Execution was not impossible. History is filled with royal women who fell from favor overnight. Their crowns did not protect them. And through it all, the princess was expected to smile. To appear graceful. To appear calm. To appear blessed. Her inner life did not matter. Her fear did not matter. Her pain did not matter. Because she was never meant to be happy. She was meant to be useful. As we continue this story, we will move deeper into the daily realities of a medieval princess, her body, her mind, her constant surveillance, and the invisible dangers that followed her every step. We will explore hygiene, illness, religion, pregnancy, court intrigue, and the quiet psychological cost of a life without freedom. And slowly, gently, as the candles burn low and the stone walls close in, you may find yourself grateful for the life you have now. Because once you truly understand what it meant to be a medieval princess, you will never wish to be one again. The body of a princess, illness, hygiene, and constant pain. The body of a medieval princess was admired, decorated, and displayed. But it was rarely understood. It was expected to be beautiful, fertile, obedient, and strong, all at the same time, in an age that barely understood how the human body worked. From childhood onward, her body was treated as a fragile instrument that had to perform perfectly under impossible conditions. Cleanliness, as we understand it today, did not exist. Bathing was rare. In many medieval courts, full baths happened only a few times a year. Water was believed to weaken the body by opening the pores, allowing disease to enter. Warm baths were sometimes associated with immorality or laziness. Cold water was thought to shock the system. Instead of bathing, the princess's body was cleaned by changing linen. Fresh undergarments were believed to absorb dirt and impurities from the skin. A clean shirt, not clean skin, was considered proper hygiene. Perfumes were used to mask odors. Heavy scents of rose, lavender, musk, and herbs filled royal chambers. They covered the smell of unwashed bodies, chamber pots, animals, smoke, and damp stone. A princess smelled pleasant not because she was clean, but because she was perfumed. Her teeth were another quiet suffering. There was no dentistry. Teeth were cleaned with cloth, salt, or powdered herbs. Cavities were common. Infections were deadly. Toothaches could last for years, slowly poisoning the body. Extraction was the only solution, done without anesthesia. For a princess, screaming in pain was undignified. So she learned to endure. Clothing, though beautiful, was often painful. Corsetry did not yet exist in its modern form, but stiff bodices, heavy layers, and tight lacing restricted movement and breathing. Dresses could weigh many pounds. Fabrics were thick, especially in cold stone castles. In winter, rooms were freezing. In summer, they were suffocating. Castles were not comfortable. Stone walls trapped cold. Fireplaces warmed only one side of a room. Smoke filled the air. Windows were small. Drafts were constant. A princess slept in heavy gowns, sometimes with head coverings, to preserve modesty and warmth. Comfort was secondary. Appearance came first. Menstruation was poorly understood and deeply feared. Medieval medicine believed that women were naturally unstable because of their bodily fluids. Menstruation was thought to make women weak, emotional, and even dangerous. During her monthly cycle, a princess might be isolated. She might be forbidden from touching certain objects or participating in religious rituals. There were no proper sanitary products. Cloth rags were used, if available. Otherwise, garments were layered. Washing was difficult. Stains were common. Shame was constant. Pain relief did not exist. Cramps, headaches, and weakness were accepted as fate. No one asked how she felt. Illness was always nearby. Castles were crowded places. Servants, soldiers, animals, and guests moved constantly in and out. Diseases spread easily. Fevers were common. So were respiratory illnesses, skin infections, parasites, and stomach diseases. Lice and fleas were unavoidable, even among royalty. Hair was combed daily not only for style, but to remove insects. Itching was constant. Scratching was discreet. Medical treatments were often worse than the illness. Doctors practiced bloodletting, believing that removing blood would restore balance. Leeches were applied. Herbs were forced down throats. Mercury and other toxic substances were sometimes used. Prayer was the most common cure. If a princess fell ill, the court prayed. If she recovered, it was a miracle. If she died, it was God's will. One of the greatest physical burdens of a princess's life was pregnancy. Once married, she was expected to conceive quickly. Failure to become pregnant raised suspicion. Was she barren? Was she cursed? Was she sinful? Her body became a public concern. Every missed cycle was noted. Every sign of pregnancy celebrated, cautiously. Pregnancy was dangerous. Miscarriages were common and rarely discussed. Stillbirths happened frequently. Infections followed childbirth. Postpartum hemorrhage could kill within hours. There were no antibiotics. There were no sterile tools. Midwives did their best, but knowledge was limited. Pain was inevitable. And yet, a princess was expected to produce multiple children. One pregnancy after another. Her body barely recovered before being demanded again. Pain became normal. Chronic pain from childbirth injuries. Pain from poorly healed bones. Pain from untreated infections. Pain from wearing heavy clothing daily. But pain was not an excuse. A princess attended court while ill. She smiled through fevers. She stood during ceremonies while bleeding. She prayed while grieving lost children. Her suffering was invisible. Because suffering was expected. Even death was not private. If a princess died young, as many did, her body was displayed. Her death was documented. Her role was evaluated. Did she produce an heir? Did she strengthen alliances? Did she serve her purpose? If yes, she was remembered kindly. If not, she was forgotten. Her body, once celebrated, was now a political footnote. As we move deeper into this quiet history, we will turn away from the physical body and begin to explore something even more fragile. The mind of a medieval princess. Her loneliness. Her fear. Her lack of choice. Her silence. Because long after the body grew tired, it was the mind that suffered most. The mind of a princess: isolation, obedience, and silent fear. If the body of a medieval princess suffered openly, the mind suffered in silence. Her thoughts were the one place no treaty could reach, and even there, she was never truly free. From childhood, a princess was taught to watch herself. Not just her actions, but her expressions. Her tone. Her posture. Her thoughts, as much as she could control them. She learned that every gesture could be interpreted. Every word repeated. Every emotion judged. Nothing was neutral. A smile could be seen as flirtation. A frown could be read as defiance. Silence could be mistaken for plotting. So she learned to become careful. Caution shaped her personality long before she understood why. Isolation was constant, even in crowded rooms. A medieval princess was almost never alone, yet rarely had a true companion. Friendships were dangerous. Ladies-in-waiting were chosen carefully, often from families loyal to the crown. They reported behavior. They listened. They remembered. Even confidences could be weapons. If a princess complained, her words might reach the wrong ears. If she expressed doubt, it could be recorded as disloyalty. If she expressed fear, it might be used to control her. So she learned to speak softly, or not at all. Loneliness became a habit. Marriage deepened this isolation. Once sent to a foreign court, the princess lost even the comfort of familiarity. The language might be strange. The customs unfamiliar. The humor foreign. The food unsettling. She was expected to adapt instantly. Mistakes were not forgiven easily. A wrong gesture at a banquet. A misunderstood tradition. An unintended insult. These were not small errors. They were political failures. And the princess was blamed. Her husband, often much older, was rarely a source of comfort. Royal marriages were distant relationships. Love was not required. Affection was optional. The king or prince had duties, mistresses, advisors, wars. The princess had expectations, and little else. In many cases, she saw her husband only briefly and formally. Conversation was limited. Emotional closeness was rare. If he was cruel, she endured. If he was indifferent, she accepted it. If he was kind, she was grateful but never secure. Her status depended on his favor. And favor could change. Fear lived quietly in her thoughts. Fear of failing to produce an heir. Fear of miscarriage. Fear of illness. Fear of rumors. Fear of political shifts she could not control. Fear of being replaced. If a princess failed to give birth to a son, another woman might be blamed, or she might be blamed herself. Some queens watched as husbands sought annulments. Others watched as mistresses gained influence. A princess learned that her position was never permanent. Religion shaped her inner world deeply. The church was present in every part of her life. She was taught that her thoughts could be sinful. That desire was dangerous. That doubt was weakness. Confession was required. She spoke her private thoughts to priests, often men who were also connected to court politics. Even her prayers were shaped by expectation. She prayed not for happiness, but for obedience. She prayed not for freedom, but for endurance. And if she suffered, she was told it brought her closer to God. This belief helped her survive, and trapped her at the same time. Some princesses learned to retreat inward. They read religious texts slowly, repetitively. They focused on ritual. They memorized prayers. The rhythm of faith became a form of comfort. Others struggled. Anxiety, though unnamed, existed. Depression, though unrecognized, weighed heavily. Sleeplessness was common. But mental suffering was not discussed. A princess who appeared sad was told to pray more. A princess who appeared fearful was told to trust God. No one asked if she wanted a different life. Control was internalized. Eventually, the princess no longer needed to be watched. She watched herself. She corrected her own posture. She restrained her own emotions. She silenced her own anger. This was considered success. A well-trained princess was one who caused no disturbance. One who endured quietly. And yet, beneath this obedience, something remained. A quiet awareness. An understanding that her life had been decided without her consent. Some princesses accepted this fully. Others resisted silently, through private thoughts, private prayers, private hopes that history never recorded. Because history rarely listens to silence. As we move forward, we will leave the inner world of the princess and step into the dangerous world around her, the court itself. A place of whispers, shifting alliances, betrayals, and sudden downfalls. Because the greatest threat to a medieval princess did not always come from illness or childbirth. Often, it came from the people closest to her. The court, intrigue, betrayal, and political danger. The royal court was never quiet. Even when voices were low and footsteps soft, the air itself seemed to listen. For a medieval princess, the court was not a home. It was a stage. Every movement was observed. Every word remembered. Every silence interpreted. The court existed for one purpose, power. And power created fear. A princess entered the court already vulnerable. She arrived with attendants chosen by others. She stood beneath banners that reminded everyone whose daughter she was, whose wife she would be, and whose alliance she represented. She was valuable, and therefore dangerous. Those who wished to gain influence courted her favor. Those who feared her influence worked quietly against her. Smiles were rarely honest. Kindness often hid intention. Whispers traveled faster than truth. Courtiers spoke in corridors, behind tapestries, beside candlelit windows. A look exchanged across a hall could become a rumor by nightfall. She seems distant. She seems too close to that advisor. She writes too many letters home. She prays alone too often. Nothing was insignificant. A princess learned quickly that even innocence could be suspicious. Jealousy shaped relationships between women. Queens, princesses, noblewomen, and ladies-in-waiting were often placed in quiet competition. Favor was limited. Attention from the king or powerful nobles could mean security, or danger. A woman who gained influence might find herself isolated. A woman who lost it might be discarded. For a princess, the presence of a mistress was especially threatening. Royal mistresses were not hidden. They were often acknowledged, rewarded, and powerful. A mistress could influence decisions. She could shape alliances. She could even influence the future of succession. A princess had no choice but to endure this humiliation publicly, and silently. To complain was to appear weak. To resist was to appear dangerous. Politics moved faster than emotions. A princess could be beloved one season and distrusted the next. Wars changed alliances. Treaties collapsed. Relatives became enemies. And the princess, tied to her bloodline, bore the consequences. If her homeland became an enemy, she became suspect. If her family lost power, her protection weakened. Some princesses found themselves isolated in hostile courts, surrounded by people who now saw them as threats. Others were used as bargaining chips again, sent elsewhere, married again, relocated without consultation. Her life was never stable. The threat of accusation always lingered. Adultery, treason, heresy, witchcraft, these charges were powerful weapons. A princess did not need to be guilty. She needed to be inconvenient. False accusations destroyed lives. A single whisper could grow into formal inquiry. An investigation could lead to imprisonment. Imprisonment could lead to death. The court rarely required proof. Reputation mattered more than truth. Poison was a quiet fear. Food was tasted. Cups were watched. Illness was suspicious. If a princess fell ill suddenly, questions followed. Was it natural? Was it divine punishment? Was it arranged? Even if poison was rare, fear was constant. The mind filled the gaps where certainty did not exist. Trust was dangerous. A princess who trusted too deeply could be betrayed. Letters were intercepted. Conversations overheard. Even servants could be paid for information. The court thrived on secrets. And secrets were currency. Some princesses learned to survive by becoming invisible. They spoke little. They revealed nothing. They avoided attention. Others tried to gain influence, carefully, quietly. They supported charities. They sponsored religious institutions. They aligned with trusted advisors. But influence came with risk. To matter was to be noticed. To be noticed was to be vulnerable. Violence was rarely open. It was subtle. A lady dismissed without explanation. A trusted servant replaced. A letter lost. A request ignored. Slow erasure was common. A princess could be stripped of influence without realizing it had happened. And yet, the court expected perfection. Public appearances were required. Ceremonies continued. The princess smiled, bowed, prayed, and stood, regardless of what she knew or feared. Her composure was part of her duty. As time passed, some princesses hardened. They learned to mask fear. They learned to observe quietly. They learned to survive. Others broke. History remembers the outcomes, rarely the process. As we continue, we will step beyond the court and into the final expectations placed upon a princess: legacy, children, memory, death. Because for a medieval princess, even after death, her value was still measured. Motherhood, legacy, and being remembered only through children. For a medieval princess, motherhood was not a personal experience. It was an obligation. Once married, her body was no longer measured by youth or beauty, but by results. The court waited. The church watched. Physicians speculated. Courtiers whispered. Every month without pregnancy increased tension. Her worth narrowed. Pregnancy was announced carefully. Too much excitement invited disappointment. Too much silence invited suspicion. When a princess was confirmed to be pregnant, prayers were ordered. Churches filled. Candles burned. The court spoke of hope, but beneath the words lived fear. Because pregnancy often ended in loss. Miscarriages were common. Stillbirths frequent. Infants died quickly. These deaths were rarely spoken of openly. Grief was expected to be private. A princess was encouraged to recover quickly, emotionally and physically. The court did not pause for mourning. Childbirth was a public concern. Rooms filled with women, midwives, ladies, servants. Curtains were drawn, but presence was constant. The princess labored for hours or days. Pain had no remedy. If complications arose, there were few options. Prayer continued. If the child lived, celebration followed. If the princess died, the celebration often continued anyway. Because an heir mattered more than the mother. After childbirth, the princess rested briefly. Then expectation returned. Another pregnancy was desired. The cycle repeated. Some princesses bore many children. Others lost most of them. Few had the luxury of choice. Motherhood did not guarantee closeness. Royal children were often removed soon after birth. Wet nurses fed them. Tutors raised them. Care was delegated. The princess saw her children daily, but rarely intimately. Formal affection replaced private bonding. She loved them quietly. She worried constantly. Infant mortality meant attachment was dangerous. To love deeply was to suffer deeply. If a princess produced a son, her status stabilized. A male heir brought security. If she produced only daughters, anxiety grew. Blame fell silently. Her body was questioned. Her value reduced. Some husbands sought annulments. Others took mistresses more openly. The princess endured. As years passed, her identity faded. She became the mother of the king. Or she became forgotten. History remembered her children's names. Her own name appeared briefly. Her personality vanished. Her fears disappeared. Widowhood offered no peace. Some widowed queens ruled as regents. Others were pushed aside. Some were sent to convents, quietly removed from politics. A convent was safety and erasure. Life slowed. Power disappeared. Silence returned. Death came early for many. In their 20s. In their 30s. Sometimes younger. Their tombs were decorated. Their effigies lay peaceful in stone. The pain that shaped their lives remained uncarved. Legacy was simple. Did she marry well? Did she produce heirs? Did she strengthen alliances? If yes, she was praised. If not, she was forgotten. Her inner life did not matter. Her endurance did not matter. Her loneliness did not matter. As we reach the final quiet moments of this story, we begin to understand something important. A medieval princess lived beautifully, but not freely. She was admired, but not protected. She was remembered, but not known. In the final part, we will step back and look at the fantasy itself. Why modern imagination still longs for this life. And why, once understood fully, it becomes clear that this is one dream best left unmade. Religion, duty, and the sacred justification of suffering. For a medieval princess, religion was not simply belief. It was structure. It was explanation. It was control. From childhood, faith wrapped around her life so completely that separating religion from reality became impossible. Every moment had meaning. Every hardship had purpose. Every pain had a reason, and that reason was almost always presented as holy. The church was present from the moment a princess was born. She was baptized quickly, sometimes within hours, because infant death was common and unbaptized souls were feared to be lost. Her life began with the idea that salvation mattered more than survival. As she grew, prayers shaped her days. Morning prayers. Evening prayers. Prayers before meals. Prayers before sleep. Religion created rhythm. That rhythm created obedience. A princess was taught that her role came from God. Kings ruled by divine right. Princesses served divine order. Questioning her fate was not only rebellion, it was sin. If she suffered, it was a test. If she endured, it was virtue. If she failed, it was moral weakness. This belief softened cruelty and made injustice feel inevitable. Female suffering held special meaning. Saints' lives were read aloud, Stories of women who endured hunger, isolation, physical pain, and death with grace. These women were praised not for escaping suffering, but for accepting it. A princess listened carefully. She learned what holiness looked like. Silence. Endurance. Submission. Marriage itself was framed as sacred duty. Even when fear filled her chest, she was told that obedience pleased God. Even when pregnancy endangered her life, she was reminded that motherhood was holy. Even when childbirth nearly killed her, she was praised for sacrifice. Religion did not remove pain. It explained it. An explanation made resistance harder. Confession was a deeply intimate, and deeply political, act. A princess confessed her thoughts to priests. She spoke of doubt. Of fear. Of resentment. These confessions were meant to cleanse the soul. But they also exposed vulnerability. A priest might be loyal. Or connected. Or pressured. Even spirituality was not entirely private. Religious festivals filled the calendar. Processions. Fasting days. Holy observances. A princess participated publicly, reinforcing her image as pious and obedient. Faith became performance. Performance became expectation. Some princesses found real comfort in belief. Prayer gave meaning to loneliness. Ritual provided calm. Faith became a refuge. Others felt trapped by it. They feared damnation for thoughts they could not control. They blamed themselves for unhappiness. They believed suffering was deserved. Religion did not create this pain. But it shaped how the pain was understood. The idea of martyrdom hovered quietly. Not dramatic death, but slow sacrifice. A life given away piece by piece. A body worn down. A voice silenced. A self diminished. This was not considered tragedy. It was considered fulfillment. As time passed, the princess's identity merged with duty. She was no longer a girl. Not truly a woman. She was a role. A symbol. A vessel of meaning defined by others. In the next part, we will look at what happened when a princess no longer fit her role. When youth faded. When beauty declined. When usefulness was questioned. Because for a medieval princess, aging was not gentle. Aging, disposability, and a quiet end of influence. Time moved differently for a medieval princess. It did not arrive gently. It arrived with expectation. From the moment her youth was noticed, its end was already anticipated. A princess was valued for what she could provide, and that value was temporary. Youth was power. When she was young, her presence mattered. Her appearance was noted. Her fertility was anticipated. But youth faded quickly. Childbirth aged the body. Illness left marks. Sleepless nights and grief carved lines long before old age should have arrived. By her early 30s, many princesses were already considered worn. Not elderly. Simply less useful. Beauty, once celebrated, became irrelevant. The court's attention shifted. Younger women arrived. New alliances were formed. New marriages were planned. A princess who no longer bore children felt the shift before it was spoken. Fewer invitations. Less consultation. Longer silences. Influence slipped away quietly. If her husband lived, her position depended entirely on him. If he favored her, she remained visible. If his interest wandered, she faded. Mistresses often gained prominence as queens lost it. This transition was not acknowledged openly. It was felt. For those who became widows, life slowed. Widowhood could bring authority, but only briefly. A dowager queen might serve as regent if her son was young. But once power transferred, she was expected to step aside. Gracefully. Silently. Some were sent to estates far from court. Others were encouraged to retire to religious houses. This was presented as honor. A peaceful retreat. A chance for devotion. But it was also removal. Out of sight. Out of influence. Convents offered safety and containment. Within their walls, former princesses lived quietly. They prayed. They managed small communities. They aged unnoticed. Their past power mattered little. Their names slowly faded. Memory was selective. Courts remembered usefulness, not endurance. Once a princess could no longer negotiate marriages, produce heirs, or symbolize alliance, she became history while still alive. People spoke of her in the past tense, even as she breathed. Loneliness deepened with age. Children grew distant, raised by duty. Husbands grew absent. Friends disappeared. The court moved forward without pause. Some princesses found peace in this withdrawal. Freed from constant scrutiny, they embraced stillness. Others felt erased. A life spent serving others ended without recognition. Aging was not respected. It was tolerated. A princess was not honored for survival. She was acknowledged only if she remained useful. And so, as influence disappeared, a new quiet settled. The noise of court faded. The weight of expectation lifted, slightly. What remained was reflection. And memory. In the next part, we will step back one last time. We will look at why, despite everything, the fantasy of the medieval princess still survives. Why modern minds long for a life that history shows was filled with quiet suffering. And what this story teaches us, not about the past, but about how we imagine it. The quiet truth behind the princess dream. Long after the castles have crumbled, the dream remains. It survives in stories told softly at night. In paintings filled with gold and light. In the idea that life was once simpler, slower, more beautiful. The medieval princess still lives there. Perfect. Protected. Desired. But history tells a quieter truth. The dream exists because distance is gentle. Time smooths pain. Memory removes discomfort. Imagination fills the silence with beauty. What remains is image, not experience. A crown without its weight. A gown without its stiffness. A marriage without its fear. In reality, the princess never belonged to herself. She belonged to bloodlines. To treaties. To expectations written long before she was born. Her life followed a narrow path. There were no detours. Freedom is invisible until it is absent. Choice feels ordinary until it is removed. The medieval princess did not miss freedom the way we do, she never knew it. Her world was closed, defined, unquestioned. And that is perhaps the most unsettling truth of all. We imagine rebellion. We imagine escape. But history shows endurance instead. Quiet adaptation. Careful obedience. Silent survival. Strength without recognition. The princess fantasy endures because it offers meaning without effort. A life where importance is inherited. Where identity is given. Where existence feels significant. But significance without agency is fragile. It breaks quietly. When we look closely, admiration becomes empathy. We stop wishing to be her. We begin to understand her. A young woman shaped by forces too large to resist. A life lived under constant watch. A story told without her voice. And so, as this long night of history comes to rest, one thought settles gently. The medieval princess was not lucky. She was valuable. And being valuable was often the most dangerous thing a woman could be. The candles burn low. The halls grow still. The dream softens, and fades. You may rest now.